We're a little late because I was waiting to be mic'd up, which apparently entails picking up the microphone. So you know. Thanks everyone for being here today. I am Daniel Goldberg. I'm a co-founder at the Palo Santo Fund. We are a $50 million venture capital fund focused on the development of psychedelic therapeutics for mental health. I'm going to let everyone else introduce themselves so I don't botch it, but we have Manisha Ghia of Fem Health Ventures, Greg Mays of Reunion Neuroscience, and Melissa Whippo of Deva Collective. It's truly a multidisciplinary group, which I think is fantastic for this panel, and hopefully you'll learn why. Postpartum depression is the #1 complication of pregnancy, which affects 17% of mothers. And this session is being recorded, which is even more reason to make sure I don't get accused of mansplaining about this topic. My wife delivered 4 babies, and she was so lucky to not be a part of that 17%. With the immense stress and excitement of a new baby at home, I cannot imagine what it feels like, certainly as a mother, and also for the family members at home to be dealing with that. So I'm going to leave it at that and let everyone introduce themselves and a little bit about your background, but we'll come back, and we can go deeper in that as well. But what you do and why you're here. Yeah, Melissa.
Thank you, Daniel. It's really good to be here, and this is a topic that is very dear to my heart. I have been working in women's health for well over a decade. I worked in the OB clinic. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so I'm a psychotherapist. I have seen, at this point in my career, thousands of women who are suffering from mood disorders that are related to, we like to call it perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, because it really encompasses the entire spectrum of pre-fertility, through pregnancy, and postpartum. And the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology says that the postpartum period is 1 year after birth. But I can tell you that it's not as fluid, or it's a little more fluid than that. It's not like the baby turns 1, and if the parents are having a hard time, suddenly they just rise up and they feel better. It requires quite a bit of treatment, and we're going to talk today about some exciting new developments. I'm also a founder of a nonprofit called Deva Collective. Deva is a Sanskrit word that means shining one. And our nonprofit is dedicated to women's health research and education and incorporating psychedelics in that. So I'm looking forward to this conversation today and glad to be here with all of you.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. My name is Greg Mays. I'm the CEO of Reunion Neuroscience. We are a small 15-employee biotechnology company that's developing a psychedelic, a psilocybin analog for treatment in postpartum depression. I've been in the pharma and biotech industry for over 25 years, but I've actually never been happier doing what we're doing now, which is really taking a paradigm-changing sector like psychedelics and applying them to really huge unmet medical needs like postpartum depression. I'm thrilled to be here. Last year I was at South by Southwest and really took all the psychedelic sessions in, like a fire hose. And a year later, I'm thrilled to be here because we raised money to now again try a psilocybin analog that has a shorter period of administration, which we will talk about, which we think could be beneficial to women as well as their providers. And we're just, I got the company funded, and we're just about to start in May a phase 2 study across the country to really see what we do believe will be a really impactful treatment for women who do suffer from this disease. But again, I believe I got into this because my son has epilepsy, and I saw the power of a psychedelic being used with respect to his mood disorders, his depression, and anxiety. We were able to control his seizures, but we couldn't control his mental illness several years ago. And you know, I started to learn about the power and potential of psychedelics. So when this opportunity came forward to really take psychedelics into a new area, I was all over it, and I'm just thrilled to be partnering with Daniel. In all transparency, Daniel has kindly and generously invested through Palo Santo into Reunion to help us fund this phase 2 study in postpartum depression. I've met Melissa, who's been a true guide in this area for our company, as well as Manisha Gia, who also is with a feminine health-focused VC that also saw the potential and power of psychedelics and postpartum depression. So we're really looking forward to sharing more of our thoughts and ideas with you today, and hopefully we'll get to some good questions as well. Manisha?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Daniel, and to everyone that's here speaking, as well as everyone who's in the audience to listen to this very important discussion on a topic that many people don't speak about. Let me, briefly on me, I run Fem Health Ventures. We're a women's health-focused venture capital firm. So we're investing in technologies that are furthering women's health. And Daniel asked a little about why we're doing this, so let me tell you why I founded Fem Health Ventures. There's really two key reasons. One is professional and one is more personal. On the professional side, I've been investing in healthcare for 25 years now, and I saw an opportunity within women's health, an area that has been historically underinvested and under-researched. And then on the personal side, the reason I'm doing this is due to an experience that I had. So I have a healthy daughter, and when she was born, I had major complications with the delivery and almost didn't make it. So in brief, I had an emergency C-section. I was at Columbia University, a top-notch academic and medical institution. And after the emergency C-section, she was born and healthy, but I didn't feel so well. And it wasn't until the next morning that my OB walked in, took one look at me, and realized that I had been bleeding internally the whole night, and they had missed it. So she rushed me into the OR and brought in 3 additional surgeons, and the 4 of them spent 2 hours with me open, trying to find the source of the bleed, and they couldn't find it. So finally, they closed me up, took me to the ICU, and I had 10 transfusions of blood and platelets. And the doctor told my husband that I wouldn't make it to the next morning. And at 1 a.m., she broke protocol and brought my newborn into the ICU to see me because she wanted me to at least have a picture with her because she didn't think I'd be around much longer. So it got really bad. Fortunately, my body was able to catch up with the bleed, and after a few weeks in the hospital, I was able to recover and come home. And coming out of that, I felt, here I was at a top medical institution at Columbia University, one of the top academic institutions in the United States with a highly experienced care team. And yet, there was so much more that could have been done, and it brought to light the need and the opportunity in women's health. And having been a healthcare investor throughout my career prior, I felt the best way for me to have an impact was to create a vehicle focused on women's health, hence Fem Health Ventures. Thank you.
Thanks, Manisha. Thanks for sharing that personal story. But it's not always the norm to share those stories, and I think it's important, and that storytelling and that sharing in a way also helps break down this idea of sometimes a little bit more in the psychedelic space of sort of big bad pharma coming in to create a drug that they're going to profit from, which of course is true. That hopefully there is profit there so that these can get funded, but it is, I think, really important to share their stories, and I appreciate that. Melissa, I want to start with you because I think we should probably zoom out and talk about postpartum depression generally, kind of, and a little bit more specific. Just tell us what you think this audience, should know, a little bit about your experience, and a little bit about the disease and whatever you'd like to share about that, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you also for sharing. And it's something I want to come back to also. So what's interesting about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and postpartum depression specifically, no one understands exactly why it happens. We know that the prevalence is quite common, and now we have more tools in place, screening tools. We have very limited treatments available. But I would say historically, probably people started talking about it in the 1970s. There were two women, Peck Inman and Shoshana Bennett. They wrote a book about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. My mother suffered from very bad postpartum depression. I was born in 75. Nobody in her community was talking about it. So, and to this day, there remains such a stigma around a mother, and fathers get postpartum depression as well. And there's also, this is for another panel, but there's a whole spectrum of birthing bodies who do not identify as female. So we want to be inclusive. But for parents who are struggling, we think that, particularly in a woman's body, it's not just that the estrogen drops, right? So the estrogen in the woman's body titrates up slowly throughout the pregnancy, and it's incredibly high at the end of pregnancy. And then when a woman gives birth, the estrogen drops. It doesn't just gently titrate down, it drops. And a lot of people think that's what causes the baby blues, which impacts between 80 to 90% of birthing populations. But a lot of providers don't feel like the baby blues need to be treated. That with support, with rest, I'm not sure who's getting rest when you have a newborn, with all of these things which require resources, additional family and other humans around, that people can start to feel better. But it's after that 2-week window that if a birthing mother is still not feeling well, then they start to assess and look at, okay, what's happening? Is it depression? Is it anxiety? Is it post-traumatic stress from having a traumatic experience, especially unexpected in delivery? So the best guess that we have right now, the working hypothesis, is it's something about the interaction in the endocrine system. There's something about the decrease of estrogen and how it interacts. Some of us are not as sensitive to those changes, but a lot of people are. And at this point, the reported numbers, I think, are lower than what's actually happening. I think a lot more people are suffering, and there's still so much stigma that they don't say so. So what ACOG, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, put in place a few years ago was routine screenings during pregnancy. But the only screening tool we have is the Edinburgh Postpartum Depression Scale. How many people here are familiar with that scale? Okay, so you know how limited it is. And it's actually not a diagnostic tool. It just gives us more information. So the good news is we're screening more, but then I feel like it's a little bit unethical because we're screening more, we're capturing more. What do we have to offer? Current treatments right now are antidepressants and other pharmaceutical medicines that a lot of people don't want to take because they're concerned about interaction with breast milk, or they have other reasons for not wanting to take these medicines. Part of my work has been bringing in psychedelics, specifically ketamine, into this space, which has been pretty controversial for a number of reasons that we don't have to get into now. But what is true is that there is a very limited number of options for treatment at this point. And so zooming out and looking to psychedelics feels reasonable to me, but I'm very much in the psychedelics field. So it is exciting to be part of this med health track because it feels like there's more convergence happening between worlds. Yeah.
No, that's great. You're reminding me, there's so much we don't know. We have an incredible we're really blessed with an incredible scientific advisory board at Palo Santo. And I'm the one who gets to ask I don't have the science background, I'm the one that gets to ask all the high level stupid questions, as I call it, but they humor me and then they tell me that they're actually sometimes pretty decent questions. And one of them was, this whole thing about hormones, right? Because it's Greg, why don't you go into this? Are we treating it, with what you're developing any different than you would treat how we expect to treat depression with psilocybin? I know our colleague Julie Holland, who, if I'll make a plug for her, there's a book she wrote called Moody Bitches which is, there's a lot about hormones in there, and she talks a lot about that. But we don't, like you said, we don't. It's a best guess. So Greg, feel free to expand on that, and of course, tell us a bit more about what you're developing and not why, but how this is all going to work.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Daniel. We are developing a psilocybin analog. An analog means something that's sort of like psilocybin, but isn't entirely psilocybin. The chemical structure is extremely similar. There's the grandfather or godfather of psychedelic development is an individual. Daniel's been to his farm. I believe Melissa has, Alexander Shulgin, but he developed a product called 4-hydroxy DIPT, which in this case, it really applies to this case. It was a psilocybin-like derivative, but it was, he observed it as having the power of psilocybin, but being much shorter. And for those who are familiar with psychedelics, one of the issues with some of them, MDMA, LSD, and even a generic psilocybin, is that they're very long in administration time. So with respect to the postpartum depression population, we would like to be able to administer a shorter acting psilocybin to this vulnerable patient population, or at least this was our theory, because it would have an immediate effect, okay? Women in this patient population, we don't have time, okay, for 6 to 8 weeks for an SSRI to see whether it works or it doesn't work, or other potential medicines that Melissa's referencing, which may be longer, may require daily compliance, may actually not allow a woman to drive a car and manage other aspects of her life. So we thought Dr. Shulgin's idea was great, but the problem was Dr. Shulgin couldn't figure out a way to administer the product. It would break down, it didn't have good bioavailability, didn't have good stability, but that was the 1950s. Fast forward to 2020, our scientists really discovered a way to sort of bring back 4-hydroxy DIPT, again, this psilocybin analog, make it druggable, and also harness the power of it having a 3-hour administration time versus 6 to 8 or even 10 to 12 hours, which are longer, which really gave us a great opportunity. And then we sat back as a company and as people who really wanted to sort of see where could this be most impactful. And we decided that postpartum depression, where it's more of an acute depression. We do believe that ultimately our product may work in major depressive disorder and treatment-resistant depression, but really wanted to go into an area of huge unmet medical need. There's only been 2 products approved by the FDA. One is essentially a non-starter. It's a 60-hour hospital infusion. But so there is a little bit of regulatory precedent, but this is a major issue. So huge unmet medical need, acute situation that requires rapid administration for women, and women who do react to psilocybin, or we believe would react to RE104 positively, should feel better the day of treatment. We'll also monitor, and the primary endpoint of our study that we're about to start is 7 days out, but we would expect to see resolution of this acute situation very rapidly, which we think would be an important advance over what is currently out there. So that's how we found the drug, and I try to call it a drug because, I mean, still to this day, although the era and perspective of psychedelics is rapidly evolving, and I think in 3 or 4 years it'll be very much sort of ingrained in our medical toolbox. But for now, I sort of say, look, we are developing a drug. We are following all the rules and regulations of the FDA. The FDA last year, for those of you who don't know this, put out clinical trial guidance for the development of psychedelic therapeutics, which is a huge step forward for the government, and I think just for the industry, and it says a lot. So we're following all that. We're going to get, hopefully, the outcome of this phase 2 study a positive outcome would result in only one more study being required and being on the path towards an FDA approval over the next 2 to 3 years. So that's where we're headed, Daniel.
Thanks. And by the way, thank you for the disclosure. I meant to do that. I felt like, what is it, Kramer, or one of those shows on CNBC, where like, we are investors in Reunion Neuroscience. It's interesting because there is this, feeling that, like I mentioned, the personal stories play such a big role. But there is also a passion, there is that same passion I find within the biotech community. Why people why and how people get involved in drug development. I think they're in the psychedelic space just because of the culture. We're sort of wired to think that there's sort of the good guys and bad guys, that like if we're going through the Oregon or Colorado route of this state by state decriminalization, legalization, which is a very different path. There may be some advantages for some people at that path, but there may be lots of disadvantages. We're sort of unabashedly, I guess, you have to sort of apologize to be living, to be working in the capitalist world sometimes in psychedelics. And I think our job is to really kind of break apart that what I think is a false dichotomy, because this is my opinion, we're going to have a lot more access overall through the current FDA approved medicine route than what you're seeing in Colorado and Oregon and other states. I'm supportive, generally supportive of what they're doing there. I say generally because it's a giant experiment. So far, it's not working out that great. I think they'll improve upon it, but there is this issue where in the media drives this narrative, I think, where it's either or. And I don't think that's the case. I think if, I was did a panel yesterday, or was it yesterday? It's a long week here. Yesterday with Rick Doblin, who, if you don't know who he is, look him up. He's really the responsible, in a way, for this whole movement. And his whole theory, 30 years ago, was once MDMA, the street name, Molly or ecstasy, was scheduled, he said, we've got to find a way to get this through the FDA, which was totally crazy 30 years ago. I mean, this is like Woodstock, and this is psychedelics as most people know it. But it was quite genius, because it's possible that this summer, likely, it's a fingers crossed moment, that the FDA will approve MDMA for the treatment of PTSD. And there's reasons why he chose that indication, but it looks like it's going to happen, and that will be a big moment in validating the medical approach. So I just want to mention that, because sometimes there is confusion. I meant to kind of zoom out and mention that earlier. There is confusion when we talk about psychedelics. We're not talking about cannabis here, where you're going to have a special card or license from the state to go talk to the bud tender about this. This is going to be prescribed. This can be these are going through the FDA, and there may be certain protocols, oversight. We'll talk about that in a bit, but I just want to mention that. Sorry, I'm the moderator. I'm talking too much. It's a conversation. Manisha, back to you. Okay, so psychedelics. Yeah, Greg,
you're more than a moderator, and also I would just want to add on to that one good point that Daniel mentioned, which is that I mean, I hope we all understand what drives me to get to the FDA, though. Like, you're kind of like, why? Oh, does that mean you can sell the product? Not really. What it does is the FDA approval that we're driving forward here in postpartum depression will ultimately trigger and in many cases require in government-assisted reimbursement programs is insurance. Because right now, as I see, people are like, oh, great, it's great. Colorado, Oregon, these different places, psychedelics are becoming available. But can people really afford to have them safely, to have access to them and then have them safely administered? And what you're seeing is that shift. And that's what the FDA approval ultimately at the end of the day will allow for, is to really ensure that this wonderful new therapy is available to women and men, if we're not talking about postpartum depression, although I just learned something from Melissa that men can have postpartum depression. So in any event, back to you.
I don't know. Oh God, if I just riff on that or take the bait, this is being recorded. We'll get into the culture wars here. But yeah, it's interesting in psychedelics. We call, you mentioned drugs. We're so accustomed to saying medicine because there's so much underground, of course, illegal, currently illegal drug use for both recreational but also really therapeutic purposes. So we've been trained to call it medicine instead of drug. I don't really believe in that. I think call it drugs, call it medicine, whatever. It is what it is. And I think we have to kind of tear down, and it does tie a bit into, into criminal justice reform and all that. I think there's a bit of a Venn diagram where you're talking about destigmatizing destigmatizing psychedelic drug use generally, and also psychedelics. I think the medical route will help. I think when your aunt or uncle or cousin who has no interest in tripping or no interest in psychedelics are going to the psychedelic track, I think when they're treated, or when they have a relative that's treated and can find some relief, that will then help those other states that are going through that process find a safer and hopefully somewhat regulated way to also administer these, because there are risks, right? But I want to get back to Manisha, because when I met Manisha, she didn't have a background in psychedelics at all. I'm used to doing the psychedelic track panels where everyone asks fun questions about what's your favorite psychedelic and this and that, and all the fun stuff, and then we have to get a little more buttoned up in the biotech space and try to translate that to, we're not hippies and this is really important and we're solving problems, which doesn't have to be one or the other, by the way. But I'm curious kind of what you thought about that and how that resonated. You have investors and you have partners. Psychedelics is still, Rick Doblin's done a great job, but it's still a bit wild and crazy for a lot of people. The biotech investors are slow to coming. They're starting to come in more and more, but it's been a while because of that. I'm curious kind of how that struck you and, yeah.
Sure. We looked at this more from the maternal mortality side. So if you look at maternal mortality stats in the United States, unfortunately, the rate of maternal mortality has been increasing. If you look in 2000, it was approximately 18 per 100,000 births. And 2021, which is the most recent CDC data, it's 33 per 100,000 births. And if you look at the country's record, the United States actually ranks last out of the top 10 developed nations. The US is number 10 in terms of their rate of maternal mortality. So as a women's health investor, we were unpacking maternal mortality and how can we do something to go after that. And if you look at maternal mortality, actually 23% of the women that fall victim to maternal mortality it is due to postpartum depression or mental health. So that is actually the way that it's categorized. It's the largest chunk and largest reason for women to fall victim to maternal mortality. And from that angle, we were very excited when we learned about Reunion, because compared to the other treatments on the market, which take longer to be effective, have many side effects, and are not necessarily the most convenient for a mother of a young child, Reunion's therapy is just one day, one treatment. A woman goes in, she gets dosed under the care of a physician and a trained professional to oversee the administration, and she can then go home and her postpartum depression is resolved after that. It's just a single treatment, which is just incredible. And we're very excited about the potential for this type of treatment to have a substantial impact on the numbers for postpartum depression and in turn put a dent in maternal mortality. The other aspect that we spoke a little bit about is the FDA approval. And as a traditional healthcare investor coming into this, that's what got us even more excited, that this product is going through a full FDA approval process, a clinical trial process. It's going to be dosed only under the care of a clinician who provides a prescription. So that background gave us the comfort to invest in a company developing a psychedelic, which otherwise it's harder for healthcare investors to become comfortable with.
It's pretty interesting. All right. Psychedelics. We're at now. I called it mushrooms for moms, and we can. Everyone probably thought we're going to tell tripping stories and all that kind of fun stuff. And I think it is important to understand a bit about psychedelic-assisted therapy, because this molecule and what you're working with is an experience, right? There's an experience happening. I say that because there are other drugs being developed in psychedelics where they're trying to take the experience out of psychedelics. I'm not going to get way into that now. It's very controversial. We did a panel on it last year. You can look it up. But this is an experience, and I'm sort of curious. Maybe we'll start with you, Melissa. Like your experience in psychedelic-assisted therapy. You have a really incredible background of both the plant medicine, natural medicine, sort of psychedelic space, and also on the ketamine-assisted therapy. So yeah.
Thanks. It is very, very controversial to talk about mothers doing drugs. And even if we call it sacred medicine, there's still that same stigma because we live in the communities in the global north. We're not part of communities where it's part of our indigenous culture to work with these medicines. And when you actually look at other cultures, they do work with sacred medicines, psychedelic medicines, and the women work with them when they're pregnant, and they work with them when they're postpartum. So, we, with our, global northern Western medicine narrative, we want to make sure everything is safe. And what does that mean? So when we looked at I was working with a group, and we wanted to look at whether or not ketamine-assisted psychotherapy would be a good treatment for postpartum depression. And when we looked at the literature, we realized that we had to first study how ketamine interacts with breast milk. So it was very, very hard to get approval to do that study. We had to give everybody a pregnancy test because the review board was horrified that a pregnant woman might be dosed with ketamine. And ketamine has gone through a lot in the press, but what I can tell you, the combination, it's not just the drug itself, but the experience and the preparation. People talk about set and setting, but it's about relationships. We are human beings. We are all relational beings. We heal in relationship. So I am part of a group, it's called 3 Cups Psychedelics. We're offering an advanced training, and this is one of the things I like to talk about, is how important it is to do the prep work and also integration. And none of it is a linear process. A lot of people, particularly in the plant medicine world, feel like as soon as you sign up for a ceremony, the medicine starts working with you. That's a very hard thing to quantify in scientific literature. It gets very tricky. How do we categorize and quantify ineffable experiences? How do we make meaning out of experiences that people have with medicine and bring that back to their lives? With ketamine, what I have seen is that particularly postpartum women do not need very much medicine. So a lot of the dosing protocols that we were taught in our training don't apply. We really have to take a different look at where somebody is at in their menstrual cycle, where somebody is at postpartum, whether or not they're breastfeeding, and there are certain indications. To this day, I have not met a single medical doctor who feels comfortable making an official clinical recommendation, even though there's a published study, you can find it, about the pharmacokinetics of ketamine in breast milk. But it was very small. We had 4 subjects, but the results were so promising that we went ahead and published it because we knew that would pave the way for the next thing. That's something that I've learned a lot about as a newer researcher. Sometimes we do these small steps to get to the next thing. So it's why I feel like it's so promising. If this drug can work so rapidly, then the therapy piece is just going to support that good work. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Biotech. Go ahead, Greg. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to comment on that. And with respect to the Reunion investigational asset that we're looking at for postpartum depression, it has a 3-hour half-life. We do believe that women will be able to return and reunite with their child after the treatment. And in fact, that's why we named the company Reunion specifically, because it's the Paul Simon song, the mother and child reunion. And that's how the name of the company, because that's our priority right now, is to reunite a healthy mom with a healthy baby.
All right, that's pretty cool. I did not know that. That's a great name. Do you want to touch upon, let me look at my notes here and see what, I had a question. I'll just throw this out there. Why not? Everyone has their biases. MDMA, it's a very reliably positive experience. There's a reason why it was chosen for PTSD. It's specifically, you wouldn't send someone for PTSD necessarily right off the bat to go sit with ayahuasca necessarily, or mushrooms. It's very, why not like MDMA? Like why this molecule? For those that maybe are familiar with other psychedelics.
Sure. So from my view, there's a spectrum of psychedelics, and I don't have a favorite. I think different ones are good for different situations. But one is the intensity. So different criteria apply to different psychedelics. So we thought a psilocybin analog would be perfect because it's sort of like perfectly right down the middle. You're going to be treating, as we know, a woman who's in a vulnerable state with postpartum depression, a new baby, potentially family, et cetera. DMT or 5-MeO DMT are shorter psychedelic experiences, but as we were talking yesterday, they're intense. I mean, they have a level of intensity that may not be appropriate. They could require multiple treatments, multiple sort of short-hour treatments, so maybe not ideal. And then MDMA or LSD are sort of at the other end of the spectrum, a lot longer in the administration time. So as I mentioned earlier, our phase 1 data shows that we can administer this investigational asset from Reunion Neuroscience in 3 to 4 hours. A traditional psilocybin is more like 6 to 8. LSD and MDMA are 10 to 12 hours, and this is all sort of like cited in the literature. It doesn't mean one's better than the other. I mean, potentially, Daniel, I could see MDMA potentially being evaluated in this area, but we thought again that this was the right patient population and the right characteristics of a drug to be successful there. And we also looked, to your point earlier about, sort of the capitalistic nature. I mean, we really want to be in a position to benefit women. If we were really into it for the money or the return, you'd go right into treatment-resistant depression, which is patients who have failed 2 or 3 prior lines of antidepressant therapy and really can't sort of get out of the loop, so to speak. That's sort of the major pot of gold in this area. But no, we want to start in an area where we think we've got a high probability of a proof of concept, and start there and take the product forward.
Yeah, and by the way, just I asked the question not as a necessarily I didn't know what the answer exactly was going to be, but as I think about it, I was listening closely to the panels that I was not involved in the psychedelic track. There were a couple panels on MDMA that our colleagues were on, and there's a lot of controversy around whether there is how many people have a come down, have a real bad dip after MDMA. You can read everything you want about it, but if you speak to the absolute experts in this space, they will give you different answers, right? There is this I would call it PR out there that in a therapeutic setting, as opposed to recreational, because most people are generally using, historically using MDMA, their kids partying at Lollapalooza or whatever. There's other factors there. They're drinking, they're irresponsible. It's not pure. By the way, MDMA, there are outside of the medical context, it's more dangerous because of the potential for fentanyl and all that. But there can be a dip. I can tell you there is a dip for many people, and it can be fairly random. You can talk to people who are very responsible adults doing it in a pure MDMA in a therapeutic setting, and they will tell you sometimes they have a afterglow, and sometimes they have a real serious dip. And I'm just thinking, I can't imagine. I can only imagine that would be an issue to explore if you're talking about postpartum, where the risks are so high when you're talking about not only the mother's health, but of course potentially harming the baby, which is one of the reasons that this is such an exciting development. When we talked to the psychiatrist on our team, she said, this is something keeps her up at night. When you talk about the life of the baby as well.
The safety of our psilocybin analog, to the extent we move into postpartum depression, and you probably are wondering, what is the safety profile? And it's really related to the administration of the product. You typically see reports of maybe some nausea, headache, and then of course you have the hallucinating effect. But from my perspective, I don't see hallucination as a side effect or an adverse event, is what it would be technically called. I see it actually a sign of efficacy. And that goes to the great debate that Daniel was referring to earlier. Do you need a hallucination? We believe it's showing that the product is hitting the serotonin 2A receptor and is ultimately going to create a situation in which there's been a positive outcome. So. But again, I just wanted to, because if you're interested in understanding how this might work with a woman who has postpartum depression, really the adverse events, so to speak, are related to day of administration.
And I promised myself that I would refrain from making all the typical jokes that people make on psychedelic panels, but our mother's gonna want a trip. I think that it could be, that could be the percentage of mothers that are comfortable or even maybe excited, like, oh wow, like I never did this. That answer might change over time. If 4 years ago you couldn't talk about this, and today you can talk about it with there's people that come up to me, I'm shocked at who comes up to me and says, tells me about their experience. I think that answer may change. I don't know the answer to that question. They may, it's not even a joke, but I just thought about it. Do you want a longer experience to get away from that screaming baby for a little bit? But, that really gets into the economics, because it's shortening it to half a day is to me what was very exciting to know that, if you're going in for a colonoscopy and they said it was 7 hours, that would be a very different model, in terms of, So we're going to run out of time soon. We probably should do Q&A. I have a couple little notes I'll try to squeeze in, but is there anything from, Manisha or, any of our panelists that, anything that you want to add? I always ask, what keeps you up at night on this? What are you really excited? What keeps you up at night? But really, anything that anyone wants to add before, if we do want to do Q&A, and if there's no Q&A, we can keep going. Yeah.
I'll just add something quickly. I think we talked a little bit about the FDA, but maybe, Greg, you could tell them a little more about that, just how they're now comfortable with this and how they've created guidance and a path forward for psychedelics. I think that was very integral to how we thought about this. And a lot of it has to do with safety, which we were speaking about. Postpartum women is a high-risk population from the view of the FDA. They're very protective of pregnant women, postpartum women, and the types of therapeutics that they're offered. And the fact that the FDA has become comfortable with psychedelics and is even okay with dosing them specifically in women who are postpartum is a big change, and what makes it very exciting. And the potential for this product has increased substantially because of that specific comfort of the FDA. Maybe you could just talk a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So, the FDA has a program called Breakthrough Designation Therapy. 3 companies in the psychedelic area have already been granted Breakthrough Designation Therapy, which is where the FDA actually becomes a partner and is supposed to help you. They can't guarantee the success of the data. But I've actually, I believe that the FDA has not approved a treatment paradigm shifting antidepressant in over 5 decades, and they recognize that. And they also recognize and appreciate the fact that we're in a world that is full of one big, hairy mental health crisis. And you can't get off your phone every day without seeing some article or something about the mental health crisis we're in. So it's been great to see that the FDA, I think, is really embracing it. Again, they came out with clinical trial guidance. They're really telling companies like mine, don't get it wrong. Don't screw it up. Here's the playbook. Follow the playbook. If the data supports your proposition, we will help you. It's been wonderful. And I've worked in my 25 years for companies where the FDA hasn't always been a friend. It's been quite the opposite. It's been a foe. So I'm really thrilled with that. The other big question you get in this area is, how the heck are these things going to be administered, right? Are you going to take these at home? No, the FDA is going to clearly say no, at least for now, which is why you have a debate about the hallucinating effect, because some companies like mine want to see if they can take the hallucinating effect out so people could take these at home, because the FDA is concerned about sort of the hallucinating on your own without a sort of a trained professional available to you. But it's really great that the FDA is going to put in what they call risk evaluation mitigation strategies, or REMS, for companies like ours, which means you'll probably have to go to a specialized treatment center. As a psychiatrist or an OBGYN would refer you to a specialized treatment center. They will order the psychedelic treatment to you, and it's great. There's been, the American Medical Association has promulgated CPT codes that will allow these treatment centers to actually get reimbursed for their time. We want to make sure that people in the system are getting fairly compensated. Okay, and to the extent they are, there will become more centers available to the women and men that need these types of therapies. So that's actually the biggest question and concern I get from investors is how the heck is this thing all going to be, how people are going to access it? How's it going to be distributed? The specialty pharmacy is going to distribute it to the specialized treatment center, and away it goes. Melissa mentioned earlier ketamine. There's a wonderful product on the market right now called Spravato by J&J. It's up on the wall. And J&J has really set forward a treatment model for how this could all work. So they're pioneers in the field, and it'll allow companies like Reunion to really just sort of move forward in their tracks. So
I'm glad you mentioned that, not to be like, thanks to our sponsors, but the 3 years ago when we started, or somewhere around there, we started raising capital for our fund, Spravato, which is the J&J S-ketamine nasal spray, was a negative when we were raising money. They're like, well, ketamine is, people can just do ketamine and, legally, in these clinics, it's off-label, this is ridiculous, they're just trying to make money. But people are getting, there's reimbursement. People are doing S-ketamine now, and it is saving lives now, and it is, actually, I think it's J&J is one of their blockbusters, it's considered a blockbuster drug. So now it's a positive a few years later. It's slow to ramp this up. On ramping up, therapist training. People ask me, how do I get involved in psychedelics? Train as a therapist. There are programs out there. There's Fluence, IPI. You were very early in this. You were forward-looking. People probably thought you were crazy, but you live in Berkeley. To be fair, you live in Berkeley. So, I'm from Chicago. So you were early, but their therapist training is a big issue. You get the drug approved. They're worried about this with MAPS. How many people are they don't know what they're going to require in terms of the oversight, but this is a big deal to roll this out.
Yeah, and just one thing about Spravato, it's part of their REMS is that it cannot be administered to a breastfeeding woman. So if you are breastfeeding, you are excluded from receiving Spravato. And if you look at the literature, it's not as effective as racemic ketamine. So if we could get the FDA to approve racemic ketamine, that's another thing. But I just wanted to say, I think one of the things that we've touched on today that's important to remember, this pathway will really give a lot of legitimacy to the treatment. Right now, it is still seen as very fringe. I wrote a piece not even about moms taking a journey with psilocybin, but microdosing. It was published in the Washington Post last year. It's called Some Moms. The title had to be that because we can't say all moms. Some moms are microdosing mushrooms for depression. And I had to stop reading the comments in the article because I've never read anything like that kind of criticism about moms doing drugs, about what is the world coming to that we're looking to psychedelics for moms. Yeah.
No, we're gonna is there Q&A? Does anyone want to? Do we have? Okay, good. By the way, I'll just say we do live in a culture. Yeah, go ahead. Go. Yeah. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, all of it. Well, and not only that, when you look at the studies, what's that?
Oh, sorry. He was saying, is it a bit ridiculous that someone could, in that situation? Oh yeah, you can come up to the mic too, but I'll just do his, and then if anyone else wants to come up to the mic, the question was, do we find it ridiculous that you get prescribed Xanax or all kinds of other drugs, to new moms, pregnant moms, all the above, and this is so controversial, or it could be perceived as controversial. I can tell both of our answers are going to be yes, it's ridiculous. We live in a society also where you can walk through the airport and 7 a.m, people are having like 20 beers and like getting all sloppy, and that's considered normal, and then that kind of thing. So it's a lot of his culture. You have to realize we just have a cultural hurdle that we have to get over.
And the literature says that certain SSRIs are safe for breastfeeding women, even though there is evidence that the medicine passes through the breast milk, and the literature is very scant. There are no longitudinal studies that follow a child whose mother took an SSRI while she was breastfeeding up until adulthood. So
most of the SSRI studies were falsified.
he was saying most of the SSRI studies were falsified, yes.
There is a lot of controversy with that. I mean, the psychiatrists will tell you that they generally weren't, designed to be on for 5 or 10 years. And that issue. Okay, next question, and we'll.
Hi, my name is Lexi. Thank you all for being here. I'm a postpartum doula, so I work with mothers and babies and bringing medicine and bringing the conversation of postpartum depression to the forefront. It is something that women feel a lot of shame of admitting, because it's supposed to be, oh, you have a baby, your baby's healthy. Don't you dare say that you're not the happiest person in the world. And so it's very important that we talk about it, because even just hearing that story, and it's giving me chills talking about it, other women can realize that this might be something that they're being affected by. And so thank you all for being here. And Greg, I have a question for you. In these settings, how are you training and who are you choosing to be these guides? Because it is more than just, here, take your pill, you're gonna feel better, you know. And as a mother, you're not in a, like, especially if you just gave birth, you are in a different space. You are kind of in a psychedelic space, honestly, and you do release DMT during the birth process, and there are a lot of things going on, and if you have ever had a child, you can definitely attest to that. So how can we make sure that the people in this space are safe and are conscious of the work they're doing, and it's not just a, oh, here, I'm a doctor, I'm giving you a pill, because it is a different setting and environment, you know, and how it's being administered is important to the healing process. And I feel like to not acknowledge that, and for the people doing it to not be aware of that, kind of defeats the purpose of having that, because it is about being supported.
Yeah. So yeah, let's.
Yes.
let's
Yeah.
do
I mean, we will follow a very careful protocol. Great question. Our product, by the way, is administered subcutaneously, which we think is great because it gets into the bloodstream very quickly, and people don't have to worry about digestive food effect issues. Yeah, people will go through a preparations phase. They will be administered the product with close medical monitors that have gone through a training process, much like that Melissa runs or Daniel referenced with Fluence. These are psychedelic monitors. They don't necessarily have to be therapists or psychiatrists. They are with the patient. We ensure that there's somebody with the patient to care for the patient throughout the experience. And then there's post integration sessions as well. So it is a process. I mean, ultimately it will come down to patient choice, and it'll come down to patient choice, you know, whether they see the data and that this is an option that really would be fitting for them. So as I think we said yesterday, I mean, we're not cutting corners here. This is a medicine that we are going to thoroughly develop and make sure that the women are cared for.
Thank you so much for all being here. It's so exciting to see psychedelics having this legitimization and helping so many people. I know a number of people who take very low dose psilocybin mushrooms on an ongoing basis, or maybe 5 days on, 2 days off for their depression, anxiety, etc. I haven't seen, which is so exciting to see, that you can have one dose and have such a miraculous effect. But I am wondering, on the one side, how are you even looking at the regular use for mothers who are breastfeeding? Is there any type of implication for breastfeeding for people who want to take the very low dose, like non-hallucinogen levels on a more regular basis? And as VCs, from a business standpoint, how are you seeing the potential risk of people starting to essentially grow their own medicine and take, like, you're funding all these studies, you're going to get everything approved, it's amazing, but part of the alternative healthcare space has always been, how do we protect the profits that ultimately pay us back for funding this type of research?
You want to take? I mean, generally, I'll just kind of address microdosing. Very generally, it's counterintuitive. Right now, because generally speaking, psychiatrists, doctors, and in biotech, they want to use the lowest. They want to generally use the lowest effective dose. I mean, that's just how it is. It's like, do no harm, and you do want to take less drugs if you can, just especially when we don't know the long-term effects. But ironically, it is the macro dose and the guided experience. I hope also the psychedelics without the experience will work for other mental health and non-mental health diseases, maybe even Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. You know, they're studying that right now. We don't know, but generally speaking, microdosing is not the clinical. You know, the studies have not shown it to be effective. That doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means possibly that the studies aren't reflecting how people are using them in the real world. That's one possibility, but it makes it hard to develop a drug for microdosing. There are a couple companies trying to do it. That's my kind of zoomed out perspective, but maybe one of you wants to address that as well. Yeah.
No, I think, my view on microdosing is it's an option, but I think at the end of the day, I prefer a macrodose with somebody, to your question, is actually properly cared for, prepared for, monitored. This is, you shouldn't, I fear for women taking microdoses of these at the playground with their children. And also, does that become an addiction type thing? Actually, psychedelics taken in a macrodose have been shown to be non-addictive. And so obviously I have a bias towards having proper medical care and doing it this way.
And there is also, by the way, there is some growing evidence that it's possible that chronic usage, consistent usage, there is some theoretical heart valve risk, which I hear this from the leading researchers there, who are very much, some of them are psychonauts, and some of them they like to microdose and they love to macrodose, and they will tell you, I'm getting a little concerned about the chronic usage. We know that macrodosing is safe generally. There's people that get screened out with schizophrenia and other potential for psychotic break, but there is this risk that will be tough right now with the FDA, and it could be real. I think Sasha Shulgin had like a valve replacement, and they wonder, well, was it that? He's doing all this. We don't know, but it could be an issue.
Thank you so much for convening this panel. This is really a question for Melissa and Manisha. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on the challenges that may be faced by women, either from the perspective of end users or in the development process, as psychedelics become more legitimized as an approach to therapeutics.
Make sure I understand the question. The concern about people who are choosing to do these treatments?
Yeah, either from the perspective of the legitimacy of using psychedelics as a meaningful mode of psychotherapy, and from the position that you are in now of more advocating for its usage.
Yeah, I think there is still a stigma, right, about moms doing drugs. We have this idealization that the mother is supposed to be all giving and happy and pure. And yet, again, I've said this earlier, we look at other cultures and other communities, they grow their own medicine. I think there's healing in a group of women making medicine together. That's my dream. That there is, I think we're in a place where we're building a lot of bridges between worlds. So I definitely feel like somebody who walks between worlds. There's this medical Western global North world that I live in and pay taxes in. And then there's this, these traditions that I've been fortunate enough to be invited into and to study and to learn from. And they're different and they're not. So I do think that, I live in a bubble. I live in Berkeley, as Daniel said. And so, you go to the playground and most of the moms are talking about microdosing mushrooms. That's just where I live. But, writing that article and seeing the reaction from people who live, I keep realizing I live in a bubble. I do think there is some risk because right now, psilocybin is Schedule 1. So even, trying to get an IRB to do a study, even if we're just taking people's survey information, they're essentially sharing their illegal activity with us. So how do we keep them safe while we're trying to move all of this forward? There are a lot of inherent risks, and I think more risks will be revealed as we keep going with this work, but I'm not sure what the alternative is.
I'll just add quickly that I think the stigma that you're referring to is part of why the Reunion product is so exciting, because it's going through a full FDA process. A patient would get a script from the doctor, orders to go to a specific facility and get it administered under the care of somebody, and they know what's included in that. It's a substance that the FDA regulates, just like all the other therapeutics on the market. So I think that coming to market in this manner will help take away the stigma, not only from the treatment but also having the condition of postpartum depression.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. You can move it down. You can pull it up, move it down. Get real close. Yeah.
Okay. Does it?
Yep.
Oh, good. All right. Hi, I'm Lauren.
Hi.
So I am a human geneticist by training. I worked in the mental health space for a long time. and I'm also a new mom. And so as much as I want to talk about the biology and study designs and clinical trials, which is all very exciting, I just want to talk a little bit more about accessibility. And Craig, you started to talk about this, but just in terms of accessing it, I mean, in order for, so as a new mom, in order for me to go to doctor's appointments, I basically need to make sure like my in-laws are in town so that I can go. Or in order to go to therapy, even though the therapy is remote, which is great for access, it is still, I need to make sure that my husband is available to have the baby. And then even to attend South by Southwest, we had to do massive juggling of childcare, and I'm pumping every like 3 to 4 hours. And so I would love to hear kind of your thoughts on how to make sure that women who need childcare can actually access this. Because it sounds like the process is a lot. You know, you're getting prescriptions and going to the doctors all the time, and with just breastfeeding before and after. But then also too, do you think that these like accessibility issues are going to impact the type of people that are involved in your clinical trials? So maybe they're people that just are going to be very homogeneous socioeconomically because they actually have the childcare to be able to go to these to participate in the clinical trials.
I can answer that quickly. So I think that what you're bringing up is really key to helping these mothers. I mean, they have a unique challenge of managing often a young child as well as their condition. So the options available, what I would say is ideally they wouldn't, I mean, people would not even have this condition, but the options available to treat it today are so much more burdensome that something like this, that's a one-day treatment, relative to the other options, we feel would be a big advantage. So you're right, the person still has to go to the doctor, get a script, schedule a time, maybe do the pre-therapy and so forth. But relative to the other options, now the 2 approved products, for example, one is it's a 60-hour infusion in the hospital, so that's, you know,
yeah, that's totally out.
Or
yeah.
2 weeks of therapy where there's a lot of warnings against driving in 12 hours, and you might need somebody to help with the baby for that entire time. So relative to the other options available, something that would be a one-day treatment, we think would be much less burdensome to the patient.
So would women breastfeed like right before the treatment and immediately after?
Not immediately after. I think there's some work being done, but it would be soon after they could breastfeed. Is that right?
Yeah. So we're actually conducting a lactation study in parallel with this phase 2 study that we're about to launch. That we believe will show that we believe the output of that study, based upon the half-life of the molecule, would allow women to return to breastfeeding within 2 to 3 days of administration.
So they would pump and dump, essentially.
Pump and dump for 2 or 3 days and return to it. That's what we believe. Yep.
Hey, I'm Grace. I'm a trauma therapist here in Austin, hoping to move into the integrative therapy sort of area. But I had a question about the development of this trial, and there is research that suggests that individuals who suffer with PMDD have markers for higher levels of depression around birth. So I was wondering if there was research being done about hallucinogenic therapy with PMDD, because so little is known about that, and so many women struggle monthly and are misdiagnosed. And if so, has that sort of been a stepping stone to some of the work that you're now doing?
There is an organization out of the UK called Hystelica. And do you know of them, of their work? Grace Blesley Hopkins, she's wonderful. She is doing a survey collection right now about PMDD and about the use of psychedelics for PMDD. I know that the people that I was working with, that I did the ketamine lactation study with, are also looking at low-dose ketamine for the treatment of PMDD. So they haven't written anything up yet, but there are several people, you know, there's like 5 of us looking at women's health. I mean, there's more than 5 of us, and hopefully more and more. But it's such a significant experience, and that's part of why I founded the nonprofit that we have, Deva Collective. We do have fiscal sponsorship by MAPS, but at the Psychedelic Science Conference, there wasn't a single talk about how psychedelics affects a woman's physiology, in particular in relation to hormonal changes for things like PMDD. So, yes, people are looking at it, and I'm hoping that there will be a lot more evidence-based information coming forward.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Heather, and I kind of wanted to follow up a little bit about your process for training the psychedelic guides who, complement your medical doctors. Have you looked at making sure that a guide is a good match for the person who's going to be receiving the treatment? So, folks with complex trauma and/or who, might be from like ethnic or economic groups that might experience like some microaggressions in the medical space, like they might be wary of that, and/or like that just needs to be prevented during this process, especially since it sounds like right now so many of the psychedelic studies are opt-in, and they're, let's be real, some economic and social factors that go into who's opting into this right now because of access. So, yeah.
I think it's a good question. Actually, I just learned something from you, which is actually, maybe we should be looking at sort of pairing the right guide with the right sort of patient background. That's great. So I learned something.
And that's part of the product anyway.
So thank you for that suggestion. I will say something that's really cool though, and I travel to all of our clinical sites, and I'm set and setting and understanding who these guys are. It's really important to me to understand. And what's been really a really great thing that I've learned in my travels has been that I'm meeting with guides and administrators and physicians and therapists who have actually done this now multiple times. And so I'm really blown away by their level of experience and sensitivity to the process. And because I would have thought like a year or so ago that people would be much more green, they're going to really need training, but now they've actually conducted so many sessions with vulnerable patient populations that really need this psychedelic therapy. It's awesome. So I have a higher degree of confidence in them, but I do think that's something we should probably look into. If you have a particular patient, let's make sure the guide has, I think that we ensure that they have the training. Whether they have the right level of connectivity to that patient, I'm not so sure.
I sense a AI software business play here for next South by Southwest panel. Thank you so much.
Hi there, my name is Janelle Hunt. I'm really interested in what the reframe should be to the general marketplace. I'm 40 and I grew up in the war on drugs, LSD, MDMA, psilocybin, all of these have been pushed down our throat as being bad and drugs are bad, and now we're finally getting to the point where no, these things can be helpful with integration, and they are actually making good progress for people that suffer with depression, speaking personally. So how are we going to reframe for the people that don't live in places as good as California to have the ability to have this resource for mothers? And I'm really also interested in folks that'll go through menopause, how these treatments could be impactful.
I'll try to I know I'm a moderator, but I will tell you that being in Chicago, it's been amazing to see how different these conversations are today than 6 months ago, than 8 months ago, than a year ago. I think it's happening. I think the cultural acceptance is actually moving faster. Now, there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, even the fact that you're asking the question means that there's concerns, right? The people that you talk to may have concerns, but every day, I'll tell you what I heard one time was interesting. It was like, when gay marriage, happened actually really fast at the end, right? It was like slow, and then it was very fast if you read about it. Someone said it's because eventually everyone knew someone right? It was like the conservative Republican senator, had a gay son, and it was like, well, am I going to hate him, or am I going to be like, well, all right, this is fine, this is fine. I think that's happening with psychedelics. You run into regular people now, regular people. There are some crazy people in the psychedelic space that are oh yeah, right, it's great. This is my son was suffering from this, and he went to Mexico and did that, or did ketamine legally, or did this and I think it's happening, but we do have a lot of work to do, and we thank MAPS and organizations that really spent a lot of time and money kind of as evangelists, and they get blamed sometimes for being very hypey about this, but that hype has actually been important. It's what grabbed my attention. I met Michael Pollan like a few months after his book came out, and I was so lucky to get to know him. That book changed my life, and it really was a catalyst for he was this middle-aged guy in his 60s, white guy who's very skeptical, doing research, and a journalist, and doing LSD in the psilocybin, 5-MeO-DMT. I was like, why didn't you do MDMA? That's pretty good. So I think it's happening, but the fact that you're asking the question tells me that we need to keep, probably doing more panels. We get sometimes blamed for, kind of hyping it up, but I think that's also important. So thank you.
I just wanted to respond to what you said about menopause. And so my organization is working on a study right now. We're revising our IRB because we're not doing an investigational new drug study. Part of this is a lot of us believe that a lot of this medicine belongs to the people, particularly plant medicine. So we're looking at capturing information from people who are in perimenopause and menopause, who might be working with a microdosing practice of a different plant, of a cactus called San Pedro, and the active ingredient is mescaline. And why we want to do this is the first building block, and then maybe we can do the investigational drug study next after we get the information from this study. Mescaline has anti-inflammatory properties, so it's something that could be really helpful for those of you who know anything about perimenopause and menopause. So I do think we're really, really slowly moving things, but I hope that we see more in our lifetime, certainly in our children's lifetime.
Yeah, I think it's also a conversation in the workplace too of, making sure that there is not a stigma attached with some of these activities that are really helping people to take care of themselves in a way that is positive. So thanks for the work.
And there are now corporate wellness. There are organizations like Enthea and others that are they're basically pitching benefits for ketamine-assisted therapy for mental health, and I think that ketamine is a great, in a way, marketing tool for other medicines that will become, hopefully, will become approved because it can be effective. So we're probably, Greg, do you want to say one more thing? We're probably.
I was going to say we're getting there. We're not there, and I think come August of this year, though, Daniel, everybody on the stage knows this. There's going to be a PDUFA date, which means the FDA has to basically make a decision whether MDMA is going to be approved for post-traumatic stress disorder. We're getting there. The government is already, I know, reimbursing veterans and military personnel for psychedelic treatment, even though the government hasn't technically approved any of these therapies for their use. So we're getting there. I live it every day, believe me. 1 in 3 investors that I called upon, not to make money, but just so I could ensure we were funded to do this important research in postpartum depression. And our data sheets show 1 in 3 just said, sorry, psychedelics, no, we're not investing in that. That's like a drug, an illicit drug. And I didn't bother to get into the debate with them. I'm just kind of like, I'm on to the next one. That's fine. You're going to miss a wonderful opportunity to change the world.
I want to thank our panelists. This was put together fairly last minute for South by, and they said, well, we're out of space in the psychedelic track, but you could do health and med tech. And I was like, I don't know, are they going to be interested? And I'm really glad we're here at the health and med tech track. I think it's important. And I want to thank you three for the relatively last minute hopping down here. Check out their organizations. I'll do the advertisement at the end of the, Deva Collective, and of course, Reunion Neuroscience and Fem Health Ventures. And you can learn a little bit about us at Palo Santo. You can Google us. And I also make a little plug for the Shulgin Foundation. There's a guy that took a lot of risk a long time ago that is beloved in the psychedelic community. You can read his books. They're a little wonky, but the Shulgin Foundation, our friend Peter Vitale, who runs it, is kind of working to support the legacy, because it's really great to honor the people who took risks. We're taking great financial risk and risks with our careers that this will happen, but he took some legal risks back then when it was really crazy. So it's pretty cool. Check it out.
I'm going to put a shameless plug in, not for Reunion Neuroscience, because that's just an entity out there that's really funding this, but for the trial. So to the extent you know or can spread the word about this wonderful phase 2 study in postpartum depression with a psilocybin analog, post it. Talk to your physicians about it. Write to me about it. We'll get you or people in your network to the right site, because we do need 72 patients over the next 9 months, or we're not going to get there. So to your point, I need 72 patients.
Thanks, everyone. I think that was about 3.5 hours. So our trip just ended. We dosed right before as part of the trial, and now we just wrapped up. I thank South by Southwest for letting us go long. Yeah. Oh yeah, picture. Okay, thanks, everyone.